Hey, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to take a look at a new power station that's just hitting the market from OUPES. Now, I've reviewed a number of OUPES branded power stations before, and this is the second one in their Exodus line, and the newest addition to their Exodus line. And I've also done some reviews on units in their Mega line as well. If you want to go check those out, just go search in my videos on my channel homepage for OUPES or Mega, and all those should pop up. But this is the new Exodus 1200, and as I said, it is just now coming out. Now it's got a 1200 watt continuous rated pure sine wave AC output. And if you forgot what kind of capacity it has, they conveniently stamped it in large numerals right here on the front. So it's got 992 watt hours of capacity. Kind of a strange number. Normally you see something like 1024 or 2048. But this one is 992 watt hours. So does not have wireless charging as far as I can tell. I went ahead and skipped the unboxing for you. It does come with a pretty decent little manual here, AC charging cable, and a car charging cable. Looks like maybe a DC 7909 with a standard 12 volt 10 amp car socket. So a couple ways to charge. Now their Exodus lineup, in contrast to the Mega lineup, is their ultra budget line of power stations. So you're going to get the lowest cost per watt hour for these power stations. And I'll get into the specific pricing on this at the end of the video, because then I'll have the latest pricing at that time that I can share with you. But I already know this is going to be one of the lowest costs per watt hour that I have seen. So stay tuned for that. But that's also why you don't get a solar cable in the box. If you do add a solar panel to that, they will provide the necessary cable that you need to connect it to this unit. Of course, you can also buy them online easy enough. But despite its ultra budget nature, it does have a UPS, or what they call EPS mode. So we're going to test that and see how well that works. It does have a PD 140, so PD 140 watt Type C output, which is kind of surprising that it has PD 140. I mean, most units in this category will max out at a PD 100 watt, but this will give you up to PD 140. So that's pretty cool. It weighs in at a modest 25 pounds, so very manageable in the weight category. Let me see, anything else noteworthy? It's got a 3-year warranty. So I think that's about all I need to get into right now. Let's jump forward in time and see how this thing fares on the bench when we run it through the paces. See you in 2 seconds. All right, let's do an output capacity test of the AC inverter on this Exodus 1200. As you see here, it is rated for 992 watt hours. We're going to find out how many watt hours we actually get out of it using the AC inverter. So I'm going to go ahead and plug a heater in that is going to pull actually slightly above that 1200 watts, and then it'll settle back down a little bit, and we're going to just see how that works. All right, we're going to watch that climb, and we'll see if we actually trip overload protection on this. We're going to find out. Now we're just slightly over 1200 watts. Actually a little more than slightly. And hopefully we'll settle down before we trip the overload protection. There we go. Now let's check the voltage while we're at it. Output in a full 120 volts. That's excellent. All right, let's count up the watt hours until this thing shuts us down, and we will find out what capacity we actually get through the AC inverter. All right, our AC discharge capacity test is done. Let's hook the tester up to power here and see how we did. 820 watt hours out of a rated 992. So that is pretty much a right down the middle average number of about 82% of rated capacity that we got out of that AC inverter. Should be at 0% state of charge, and we are. And there is one little, I think, footnote that's worth mentioning. This will actually shut off with 6% remaining if the load is greater than 300 watts. So when you have 6% remaining, that's about 77% of rated watt hours if you have a load greater than 300 watts. So to get the full 820 watt hours that we actually registered, you have to be running a load at least in the last 6% or so of the state of charge below that 300 watt threshold. Otherwise, it will not let you do that. So I think this is the first power station I've seen that behaves that way. And while it's probably a non-issue for most people, it is something that you want to be aware of. All right, let's do a battery capacity test out of the 12 volt 10 amp car socket, the DC output. And we are going to have to step down to 12 volts because the system voltage on this is kind of an interesting 32 volts. So it's not your typical 24 volt or 48 volt system, or even 36 for that matter. So we have to step down from 32 to 12, so there will be some losses involved with that. But let's see if we can pull the full 10 amps out of this DC port. So let me go ahead and first turn it on to enable the DC outputs. And you can see we're reading over here 12.2 volts. So let me go ahead and crank up the amperage. And it looks like we are getting the full 10 amps. There's a fair amount of voltage drop there. We're down to 10.6 volts. So if it drops any below 10 volts as we lose state of charge, we'll know this is not a regulated DC output port. It may be, but we'll have to find out. Okay, so we'll let the watt hours count up, and we'll run this thing all the way down on charge until the BMS cuts us off, and we'll see how many watt hours we actually end up with. All right, our DC discharge capacity test is done. Let me put up some video here of a time lapse that I ran while I was performing the test, and you can see we are counting up the watt hours right here. And even though when we get to the very end, to that final number, when we finally lose power from the DC port, up until we lost power, we stayed pretty much pegged right at 10.8 volts. It didn't drop below that. Now 10.8 volts is relatively low in the allowable range for 12 volt devices. The low end of that range is really about 10.5 volts. So 10.8 is still within the range, but it is admittedly a little bit on the low side. And that is because we were pulling the full 120 plus watts. But the important thing to take away from this is that it did not drop below 10.8 volts. So it does appear that this 12 volt port is regulated, but it is regulated at a relatively low voltage. Now taking a look at the actual result, let me zoom in here. And you can see that we did get 754.34 watt hours. Now that is still relatively low in terms of the amount of watt hours we got relative to that 992 rated watt hours. That's about 76%, I think, of rated. And that is that's about 5 percentage points lower than the typical average that I see using this particular test. So for whatever reason, the usable watt hours out of the DC ports is a little bit lower than average on this OUPES Exodus 1200. All right, let's do some load testing on this Exodus 1200. I have it currently loaded at 604 watts. We're going to throw a little bit more load on it and see if we can just get it just maybe a little over that 1200 watt continuous rating. And then we're just going to watch it and see if it'll run for 10 full minutes. And I'm going to put my decibel meter up there at some point during the time lapse so we can get a sense for how loud this thing is when it's running full out. So here we go. All right, pulling just under 1300 watts, so we're about 73 watts overrated. Let's start the timer. All right, we ran for a full 10 minutes, about 60 watts over that rated 1200 watt continuous. So the load test is a definite pass. And if you were paying attention to my decibel meter here, the fans are running full bore right now, and that equates to about 66 or 67 decibels, which means that this is not a particularly quiet unit. It's kind of a white noise. As long as it runs continuously, it probably wouldn't bother me, but it is not a silent unit by any measure. It is a little on the loud side. Now, one other thing I probably do want to talk about on this unit is it has that, that boost mode that a lot of portable power stations nowadays have, where you can, if you turn that on, what it will do is it will regulate the voltage within the safe range to keep it from tripping the overload. And by doing that, it'll reduce the output voltage on the AC side. And so what ends up happening is that you lower the overall output to keep it within that 1200 volt or 1200 watt range, but you may be dropping the voltage down to say 110 or maybe even 108 volts in some cases. And that is not good if you're going to try to use that boost feature with complex electronics like TVs, microwaves, computers, things like that. Anything that's got an AC adapter would include a rectifier like a laptop that switches AC to DC. Those things should be fine under those circumstances because they will regulate that themselves. But this is really only suitable for simple resistive loads like lights, fans, and heaters like I'm using right now. Now, one thing that I think is worth pointing out too on that boost mode is I don't think that there's a way to turn that feature off on this particular unit, not even from the mobile app. So they do have a new mobile app, and I think it's called Cleanergy, and I'll have to pop that up on screen here and talk about it a little bit. But you can get it on Android, the Android App Store and the Apple App Store both. And it does contain all the basic functionality. You can adjust the auto timeouts for both the DC and the AC separately, which is nice. That's in their eco mode there, and I'll kind of show you how that works. But then you can also set it to whether you want the screen to shut off after a certain period of time, and you can adjust it from high charge mode to or fast charge mode to slow charge mode. And that's basically somewhere between 300 watts to 600 watts. We've already talked about that a little bit, but you can set that in the app. The thing that you can't do, as far as I can tell, through either a keyboard combination or a key button combination or through the app, is to turn that boost mode off. So just something to be aware of, because if you're running if you're powering a TV with this, you would not be wanting to exceed that 1200 watts, because it will throttle the voltage out, and that might be harmful to a TV or an AC fridge, for example. So you want to run those complex electronics well within or below that 1200 watt rated maximum. So just something to be aware of. All right, let's find out how noisy the output is on this AC inverter. We're going to do that using an old guitar amp. If you've seen some of my other reviews, you know that this is a crotchety old guitar amp that I got from a pawn shop. Doesn't even have a grounding pin on it, no noise suppression, no nothing. So if there's a lot of noise in the line compared to what we would normally get off a clean grid power supply, we'll definitely hear it. So just to give you some baseline, I do have the amp plugged into grid power right now. So let's get a comparison right now, just a baseline, and see what it sounds like from a clean grid power source. So little pop to start it on, slight buzz. Now I will have boosted that about 9 or 10 decibels for you, just so you could actually hear it. And I'm going to boost the sound we get the same amount once we plug it into the Exodus 1200 and see if it sounds any different. All right, got it plugged into the Exodus 1200. Let's redo the test. Okay, I have to admit that I'm a little surprised. That was actually very clean. I thought a budget power station like this would certainly have a noisier AC output than it actually has. So you be the judge. I could not hear the difference. That sounded exactly the same as grid power to me. So again, a little surprised by that, but that's a definite pass. All right, real quick, just to confirm that it does have passive charging, and you can charge while discharging at the same time. I'm inputting solar here on the right side, and I'm only getting about 54 watts in, 56 watts, just because of the conditions, but I am also discharging at a much higher rate here out of the AC port. So not all power stations will allow you to do that. Most will. This one does. So you can charge and discharge at the same time. This is through DC, and let me connect a power cable up to it, and we'll make sure we can do it through AC as well. All right, so I've got AC power going into the side right now. Now let's plug in some solar at the same time and see what happens. See if that goes over 600 watts. It should, and it is. So this should give me, based on the conditions right now, somewhere around another 100 watts. But if I actually go ahead and reapply a load here and see if I can turn the AC inverter back on. Yeah, we're getting an E001 error, and that is because there is a limitation on this unit where it cannot provide a total input and output exceeding 1200 watts. And since our input was already at 600 watts, and we were trying to put a load on this, which was, actually I had it set to the max, which had been 1200 watts. So we were exceeding that 1200 watt total input output threshold. So let's try it again. Let's see what happens if I lower down to around another 600 watts. Let's see if we can get away with that. So the combined total of these two numbers really can't be over 1200 watts. So it is letting us do that. So that's another limitation you want to be aware of. Yes, you can discharge while charging, but your total input and output cannot exceed 1200 watts. So that's working as designed. All right, I'm going to run this thing all the way down. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the charging here, and I'm going to ramp up the discharge because I'm going to fully deplete this thing, and then we're going to connect solar. We're going to find out if this will wake and charge itself on its own tomorrow morning. All right, it is just a little after 11 in the morning. After a fairly overcast early start, the skies have cleared up. We do have some bright sun shining right now. So let's go in and see how we're doing. Well, I see a light on. That's encouraging. Yes, we are charging. Currently taking in 135 watts. We're at 31%. So I think the maximum input wattage on this is 240 watts. So in this case, with a 200 watt solar panel, I should be able to get pretty close to topping this thing off in a full day of sun. So I'll take 200 times 4.5 or 5. That should give me somewhere close to 900 to 1,000 watt hours of charge capacity. So I don't know, we'll just kind of let this thing go and check back at the end of the day and see if we're fully charged or not. All right, it is about 5 hours later, and yeah, we're only at 76%, and the sun is just now starting to creep behind the trees. So that couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours of morning overcast we had kind of did us in terms of being able to top this off. You can see now we're only pulling in the barest minimum. The charge controller is having trouble really generating a charge right now. Just too many shadows on the panels. So yeah, might have been better to over panel this, but again, you know, you're only working with a maximum of 30 volts, so you got to be really careful how you do that. But yeah, if you can over panel this and really get that maximum 240 watts in on a decent day, then that is definitely enough to top this off. But a 200 watt panel with less than ideal conditions, probably not going to get you much further than about 76% where we are now. All right, let's test the UPS, or in this case, the EPS mode. I've got my gaming system here, which is a desktop PC on the ground or on the floor, and my widescreen monitor here through an outlet strip that's plugged in the front. So that's powering this whole system, and then I have AC power coming in on the side. So I'm pulling on the system right now just under 500 watts, and I'm inputting from AC just about 118 watts. But it should be in EPS mode here, or UPS mode, such that I can remove power, and we'll find out if it's fast enough switching to keep my gaming session alive without rebooting my PC. So here we go, let's try it out. 3, 2, 1. So that definitely worked. Did not shut down my machine. Let's see if it goes in the other direction. Let's put power back in from the grid. I heard a little relay, and we are still cooking away here. So yes, this is a, even though it's not UPS mode per se, EPS mode on this Exodus 1200 is good enough for my gaming PC to not allow it to reboot in the event of a power outage. So that's a pass. Now, I did test the no-load draw on both the AC inverter and the DC outputs, and on the AC side, it will consume approximately 12 to 12.5 watts continuously, or about 1.25% of the overall capacity per hour that you leave the AC inverter on. And that's a pretty typical number, I think, for a 1200 watt inverter power station. And on the DC side, I actually didn't register any capacity loss throughout the default 6-hour auto shutdown window, which was nice to see. And as I think I mentioned previously, you can definitely adjust those auto shutdown settings or disable them entirely if you want, if you're using the mobile app. Okay, so what have we learned about this Exodus 1200? Well, let's start with the compromises. It's definitely not the fastest charging power station, either through the AC input or via the solar DC inputs. But I'd say that the charging speed is at least certainly adequate, I think, for how most people would want or need to use it. It's also not a particularly quiet power station, putting out about 66 decibels when it's running full out. And for some people, that might be a deal breaker. But again, you know, for a lot of people, I'm not sure that's something that they wouldn't be willing to tolerate well enough. And after all, even at 66 decibels, it's still significantly quieter than even a so-called quiet gas generator. And then there's, well, and maybe this is a bit of nitpicking on my part, but I'm not super fond of this back edge molded handle design here, which is kind of a similar handle design to what's gotten to be pretty common on the smaller power stations, those ones that are in the 300 to 500 watt hour capacity range. And I think that this design is actually relatively okay for the smaller and lighter power stations, but I'm not sure that it works super well on a power station that weighs nearly 25 pounds. It just kind of feels a little bit awkward in the hand when you're carrying it. So is that a deal breaker? Probably not, and certainly not on its own. But so with this list of compromises, why would you seriously consider the Exodus 1200? Well, this is where it actually gets kind of interesting. It does have a very solid AC inverter that does give you the full rated 1200 watts of continuous power output, and maybe just a little bit more from time to time. It does put out a full 120 volts instead of just 110 volts, as a lot of budget price inverters do, which is nice. And the output of that AC inverter is pretty darn clean for powering PA systems and guitar amps and things like that, which I said was more than a little surprising for a power station that's going to be at this particular price point. We'll get to that in a second. Now, it does have both fast and slow charge options, which I mentioned can be enabled with or without the mobile app. So if you're not a fan of mobile apps for these power stations, and I know that some of you are definitely not, I've heard from you in the comments, you don't really have to bother with the app if you don't want to. Now, taking all of these pros and cons into consideration, you might easily and justifiably conclude that this Exodus 1200 had better be priced pretty aggressively low to be worthy of serious consideration. And as it turns out, that's exactly what they've done. Now, it's available both on Amazon and on OUPES.com, and at least at the time that I'm posting this video, and pricing can and does change, but you can actually get a slightly better deal on this unit through Amazon, where if you include the discount code that I put down in the video description for you below, you can get this thing for an eye-popping $315. And keep in mind, this is a 992 watt-hour capacity power station, so at that price, that equates to just under 32 cents per watt-hour, which I'm pretty sure is the lowest cost per watt-hour that I've ever seen on a power station with a 3-year warranty from what is now a fairly well-established brand. Now, is this Exodus 1200 going to win any innovation or design awards? Clearly not, but that's also clearly not what OUPES was going for with this model. They're clearly going for, let's provide all the basics at the lowest possible cost. So if you're looking to get into a power station in that, say roughly 1,000 watt-hour capacity range at the lowest price available, without gambling your money on some fly-by-night rebranded unit from a company that may or may not even be in business in a few months, well, this might just be the thing that you've been waiting on. So what do you guys think? I know a lot of you are pretty price conscious like me. Is this something that you would consider? Let me know down in the comments below. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Hopefully you found at least something helpful or informative in the video somewhere. If you did, please consider clicking that like button for me. I'd very much appreciate that. I do sincerely offer my thanks for stopping by and watching this video with me. I really appreciate that you spent some of your time here, and I do hope you'll consider stopping by and joining me on the next one. Until then, have fun out there.